the light switch clicked, and for a brief second, the sound echoed through me louder than anything I had heard all morning. It was the same soft, hollow click I remembered from 20 years ago, back when that office was nothing, more than a forgotten corner with buzzing, lights and secondhand furniture. Now it was all polished glass and quiet prestige. A corner office with a skyline view and a title engraved on a sleek metal plaque. Lead Systems Architect. A title that, as I stood there in the dimming light, had about 10 seconds left to exist in my life. I kept my hand on the switch longer than necessary, watching the fluorescent glow fade like it was taking a part of me with it. And I realized something strange. I did not feel broken, not yet. I turned slowly and looked around the office that had once felt like a second home. The plant in the corner sagged as if it understood what had just happened, its leaves curling slightly toward the floor. The bookshelf still held the same technical manuals and old binders I had not touched in years, along with a framed photo from the early days. In it, I stood shoulder to shoulder with the original founders, all of us younger, tired, and completely unaware of what we were building. The frame was crooked, nudged out of place by a careless cleaning crew weeks ago, and I had never bothered to fix it. Maybe some part of me had already started letting go before today even arrived. Out in the hallway, the office buzzed with that familiar, artificial energy people put on when they are trying not to get involved. Conversations dropped when I stepped near, then resumed in forced whispers as soon as I passed. I had seen it happen to others over the years, but I never imagined I would be the one walking through it. After 2 decades, you become less of a person and more of a background constant, like the hum of a server rack. People assume you will always be there, until suddenly you are not. And all it takes is one carefully worded sentence from someone who barely understands what you do. "The exit is behind you," Brock had said, with a grin that suggested he believed he had just made a bold, strategic move. I did not respond then, and I would not respond now. But that moment replayed in my mind as I stood there in the fading light. His voice had been smooth, rehearsed, completely detached from the reality of what he had just done. It was almost impressive how confident someone could sound while making such a catastrophic mistake. It is a strange experience, walking away from something you helped create from nothing. When I first joined the company, it was not even really a company. It was 2 exhausted founders working out of a cramped apartment that smelled like burnt snacks and stale coffee. The server was literally tucked under a bed, humming quietly beside a pile of laundry. I wrote the first lines of code on a borrowed laptop, sitting at a scratched kitchen table while a cat wandered across the keyboard like it owned the place. There was no roadmap, no structure, just a shared belief that we could build something that mattered. Over time, that fragile beginning turned into something massive. I built the architecture piece by piece, designing systems that could scale, adapt, and survive. Every login, every data flow, every reporting function had my fingerprints on it. While others came and went, chasing promotions or chasing trends, I stayed. I stayed through the long nights, the emergency fixes, the moments when everything was on the verge of collapse. I became the person they called when nothing else worked. The quiet presence behind the curtain, keeping everything running. There were leadership changes, of course. New executives arrived with big ideas and even bigger egos, each one convinced they were about to revolutionize everything. Most of them barely understood the system they were inheriting. But they spoke with confidence, and that was apparently enough. I learned to adapt, to smile, to let them believe they were in control while I made sure nothing actually broke. It was not glamorous, but it was necessary. Then Brock arrived. From the moment he walked in, everything shifted. He carried himself like a man who had already decided what needed to change before he even understood what existed. His language was filled with polished phrases that sounded impressive but meant very little. He talked about modernization, efficiency, transformation. To him, anything that was not new was automatically a problem, and I quickly realized that included me. In his eyes, I was not an asset. I was outdated. Still, I did what I had always done. I kept the system running. I answered questions, fixed issues, and quietly maintained the infrastructure that supported everything he was trying to reshape. I watched as he made decisions based on incomplete information, cutting corners he did not even realize were critical. And I waited because experience had taught me that people like him eventually reveal their weaknesses. That moment came sooner than I expected. When his assistant asked me to step into his office that morning, I already knew what was coming. The tone was too careful, too neutral. Inside, he sat behind his desk with 2 representatives from HR positioned beside him like silent witnesses. Their expressions were fixed in that practiced look of concern, that never quite reaches the eyes. Brock stood up as I entered, extending his hand with a smile that felt completely disconnected from the situation. He thanked me for my years of service, spoke about restructuring, about the need for fresh ideas. He used phrases like new direction and evolving priorities, as if those words could soften the reality of what he was doing. I listened without interrupting, my attention drifting to a framed image behind him. It was a screenshot of the very first version of our software, the one I had built from scratch. They had turned it into a symbol of the company's success, proudly displayed for visitors and investors. The irony was almost too much. When he finished, he asked if I had anything to say. I considered it for a moment. There were plenty of things I could have pointed out, plenty of warnings I could have given. Instead, I simply said I understood. The reaction in the room was subtle but unmistakable. They had expected resistance, maybe even emotion. What they got instead was calm acceptance, and it unsettled them more than any argument could have. I walked out of that office without looking back. Back in my office, I packed only what mattered: my personal laptop, a worn leather binder, and a coffee mug that had been with me for years. Everything else I left behind. As I stepped into the hallway again, I took the stairs instead of the elevator, avoiding the awkward silence that would have followed. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of rain. I got into my car, turned off my phone, and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. Then I drove. I did not head home. Instead, I found myself going toward a small cafe I had not visited in years, a place tucked away near an old library. It was simple, unpolished, and exactly what I needed. Inside, the warmth and familiar smell of coffee wrapped around me like a memory. I ordered something small and took a seat in the corner, pulling the binder from my bag. That binder held more than just documents. It held history. Agreements, emails, notes from the early days when everything was uncertain. As I flipped through the pages, I found what I was looking for: a clause from the original agreement, written at a time when we were too small to worry about formalities. It stated, clearly and without ambiguity, that the core intellectual property remained mine until certain conditions were met. Conditions that, over the years, had never been fulfilled. I had reminded them more than once. Each time it was postponed, pushed aside in favor of more immediate concerns: growth, expansion, profit. No one ever circled back to finalize what should have been settled long ago. And now, that oversight was about to matter. I opened my laptop and composed a simple message to my lawyer, attaching the relevant documents. The subject line was straightforward, but the implications were anything but. After sending it, I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of calm that had been absent all morning. Back at the office, things began to unravel. At first, it was small issues. A login failure here, a delayed response there. Nothing dramatic, nothing immediately alarming. But systems like the one I had built do not fail all at once. They weaken in layers, each small problem revealing a deeper issue beneath it. Without proper oversight, without someone who truly understood how everything connected, those small issues started to compound. By mid-morning, the problems were impossible to ignore. Key functions stopped responding. Clients began reporting errors. Internal teams scrambled to identify the cause, their confusion growing with each passing minute. The architecture they relied on was no longer behaving as expected, and no one could figure out why, because the truth was simple. They had removed the one person who knew how to keep it all together. By the time Brock realized the severity of the situation, it was already too late. The system was not broken in a way that could be fixed with quick patches or surface-level solutions. It required understanding, experience, and knowledge that could not be replaced overnight. As the pressure mounted, as clients demanded answers, the illusion of control he had projected began to crumble. And somewhere across town, sitting in that quiet cafe, I watched it all unfold with a steady sense of clarity. They thought they had erased me with a single decision. What they failed to understand was that I had never just been an employee. I was part of the foundation. And when you remove the foundation without knowing how it was built, everything above it starts to fall. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, it can be something far more powerful. Because sometimes the most effective response is not immediate. Sometimes it is patient, calculated, and impossible to ignore when it finally arrives. And this time it was just getting started.